Well, good morning. Thanks for inviting me. I'm actually really glad to be here too. The Forest Service has got a lot involvement in this, and I think a lot of interest in the topics being presented. Now, I knew I had to follow Mike Haskey, and so I knew I needed a few props, so I kind of put on a tie and a PowerPoint so I could keep up with Mike. We'll see if that helps. I do have a few slides, but you're going to see that in the short talk and slides that I really have more questions than answers, so looking forward to the presentations. I think, as you can see, Forest Service has quite a bit at stake here in these discussions today, 25 million acres and more than half of that on the west side. I'm actually a recent transplant from Central Oregon there in the center on the Ochiko. So the last 5 years, and I said to the folks helping me put this together, I said I'd be a lot more comfortable talking the east side story, but they said, no, I need to stick to the script and go the west side story, so that's what we'll try and do, Paul. A couple things here I want to talk about is sort of the origin of the Forest Service and maybe some of the forests that we're used to on the west side. When you look at fires like this, you're saying that's what actually started a lot of these even-age forests, some of these stand replacing events. And it actually was also the origin of the Forest Service, that around the turn of the century, a lot of fires saying, hey, we need to do something, and it's really responsible for the creation of our agency. I look at this and I say maybe this is early thinning from above. I'm not really sure it's applicable, but I thought they were cool slides and I wanted to get them into the show, so I did. Those days are long gone, those one-log trucks. But clearly it showed that logging was big business on the west side. When we start trying to become more economically efficient, maybe in a sense mimic European industrial forestry, we start seeing these, if you will, these regen harvests sort of appear across the landscape, particularly here on the west side. But I think, as everybody in this room knows, that you wait long enough and change is going to happen. And sure enough, it did. For us, it was a lot of things. Advent of the Clean Water Act, NEPA, ESA. But I think in the Pacific Northwest, probably the most dramatic shift was the listing of the northern spotted owl. And of course, after that, the Northwest Forest Plan, and we saw how that changed how we do business here for the Forest Service, the BLM, and everybody else. But I tell you, things are still changing, and right now we're looking at our spotted owl, but now we have the bigger barred owl coming in and preying on the spotted owl, and what does that mean to us in terms of species shifts? How does that change affect what we do? So again, change is constant, and we need to adjust. Just a little bit of history if you look back, and we could use different time periods, but it shows 3 billion harvest and down to 334, and you can read that, but probably the 2 points to note up there is that we're about a tenth of the volume that we were 20 to 30 years ago. More importantly, currently we're at about 97% of our program is thinning. 97%, when it used to be regen harvest. Well, different way to look at time frames, and as Mike said, you can group these things any way you want, and a lot of you have seen this, but the post-World War II housing boom, timber needs, we look at that as roughly 25 years. This next one's maybe a little loose, but 70 to 2000, 30 years of environmental awareness and dynamic change, particularly in our agency. And then our folks said, maybe the last 10, 11, 12 years, we've moved more into restoration. Again, where thinning's 97%. And again, the question is, how long can we stay in this mode? And I think Mike used the same words. How accurate is our crystal ball? And we question, are we going to be able to be proactive, or are we going to be reactive to that next paradigm shift? Hope the answer is proactive. Look at all that even-age management or regen harvest I showed you, and it ended up with a lot of dense stands. We know that, both natural stands, but all these plantations. And so that bottom slide's sort of saying where the agency is now. Boy, we think we've seen the light. We've got to go into active management and thin these stands. So that's what we've been currently doing, again, 97%. But then you start looking at and saying, can we get where we want to by just thinning? So can we continue to primarily just thin? Is that going to meet our objectives? Some folks saying we're just taking the path of least resistance in the agency. sharp ones out there notice that top one's actually southern pine, but I kind of like that slide, so I put it in there. But maybe I shouldn't have told you, see who'd catch it. You know, the real question is, what are we going to do with all these uniform plantations? And the slide talks about options. I think maybe the bigger question is, what are our objectives? We know what our objectives are. We'll find options probably to get there. So is it really timber yield? Is it we want more complexity, diversity in our stands in terms of size, age, structure, composition? Is it to move things towards late cereal, old growth? Generally, we've been doing a lot of thinning from below and generally saying that what we're trying to do is move towards more late cereal, more old growth. Clearly, that's not our only goal, but it's been a primary one, I think. Time-wise, I may skip over that. Really want to talk more about implications rather than pretend we have answers up here. And what we've been talking a lot in regional office around the region is, what are the implications of what we're doing? Do we really know? When you're doing 97% thinning, how's that affecting water storage and snow melt and infiltration and different kinds of wildlife habitat? I see on the agenda, you know, songbirds and species that like openings. What's it doing on forage production and carbon storage, et cetera, et cetera? And do we really understand those implications? So I think part of our challenge is to articulate what we want. You know, I'm confident if we know what we want to do, that we've got people in our agencies, people in this room that can help us get there, help us with the how. And I think we need to answer, you know, will our thinning practices that we've been doing get us there? If we can articulate our objectives, is it the right tool to do it, or is there something else? And about near the end, this next slide maybe says the same thing in more of a pictorial way, but first one up there, climate change, and then fish and wildlife habitat, disturbances, fire, et cetera, infrastructure for timber industry, recreation, urban interface we've been dealing a lot with. You know, I think as an agency, we're not saying we need to quit thinning, but I think we clearly understand we can't continue at 97% of our program thinning. It'll be less than that. But more importantly, it'll be maybe we change not how much we thin, or not just how much we thin, but we change how we thin. You know, more gaps, more groups, more multiple entries, whatever, to get more diversity, et cetera. Again, I think the key for us is to be able to articulate our objectives and to understand the implications of our actions. So again, I look forward to hearing the rest of the presentations and the discussions that follow. So thanks for your time, appreciate it. And do we have time for questions? Paul? Sure do.
Speakers. Yeah, I'm John Tappener. And when you mentioned 97%, I guess you meant 97% of your program, of your timber program?
Correct.
How many acres, do you have any idea currently of the young stands that could be thinned, what proportion of those are being thinned?
You know, John, I don't have a good estimate. I can tell you, talking to our folks, that generally in fuels and silviculture prescriptions, we've been funded at somewhere to a quarter to a third of what we need to do. But I can't tell you exactly in terms of how many of our stands need thin. But generally, we're funded to do about a fourth, a third of what we knew in veg management, what we need to do.
Any other questions for Jeff?
You and Mr. Ask mentioned that there are a lot of questions that need to be answered as far as what we're going to do with the future management. Where do you see the funding for the research to do that coming from?
I think realistically it's going to be tight. You know, it'd be nice to stand up here and say, boy, we got the right cause and right thing, funding will follow. I don't think it will. I think it's going to be bare bones for the next several years, and so it's a matter of, you know, again, choosing which ones will get us the biggest bang for the buck. We just had the Secretary of Agriculture out here, and he says, folks, we're not even talking about a glide path. We're talking about sort of dropping off the table in the next few years until this country gets things in order. So it's going to be very tight funding the next several years, to be honest. Okay, thank you.